Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate stories that heal. I want to thank all of you listeners for subscribing and following and sharing and commenting. I always enjoy hearing from our listeners, and they've had such positive things to say. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest, Sidian Morningstar Jones. Sidian Morningstar Jones is a personal mythologist, a TV personality, vocalist, and author. Sidian has given talks around the world about shamanism and the future of spirituality. He is the grandson of the legendary shaman Rolling Thunder and co-authored 2 books about him, The Voice of Rolling Thunder and The Shamanic Powers of Rolling Thunder. His books have been featured on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. He's a graphic designer by trade, having designed for brands such as Apple and Stephen King, but his true passion is personal mythology, which he develops products for under the branding of My Mythos. He has a forthcoming book, Mythic Color, a personal mythology guide. His passion is beliefs and empowering people through them. Let's welcome Sidian here today. Hi,
Thank you,
Sidian.
Gail. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure and honor for us to have you here today. I don't know if you've ever seen our podcast, but I always start my podcast off with everyone with the beginning of their life, their childhood, where I just have one simple question, which is, like, some people have had all these different experiences growing up and through their childhood, and they knew that their path was going to be what they do today. Some people didn't have this experience till their 50s or 60s, where all of a sudden they went on a spiritual path, or they became a shaman, or whatever different things occurred. So I always like to ask if there was anything in your childhood or your readings or your fantasies that was stirring around in you as a young kid that later brought out this plan of mythology and the kind of things that you do today.
Yeah, there was a huge awakening for me. It seemed to happen right when I turned about 18. And it seemed to be spurred in large part by getting out of school. I hated school so much. And I would get like straight Fs throughout all my classes. I was a
High
terrible
school
student.
dropout.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, at least I got the high school diploma and stuff. But even that, like, I didn't deserve it. They shouldn't have given me that. But once I got out of school, um, something big changed for me inside. I had a big realization about who I could be, how I could decide to shape myself instead of being so under pressure from the rest of society and my peers. I
Yep.
I kind of discovered this internal freedom, and I was known among my friends as the guy who had the latest video game console with the best games. Like anytime I would get money from somewhere, I'd do a bunch of research. I get like the best games you could get. We'd play them together all the time. And when I had this big awakening, I turned around and I sold all my games and the video game consoles. And my much to my friends' dismay, they didn't understand it at all. I started playing guitar and writing lyrics, and I got this idea. I had this big idea that I was going to change the world somehow, and that it was going to have to do with beliefs and spirituality and things like this. So that was my big awakening moment.
And that's very, knowing how I have 3 adult children, and watching them go through their video things, and they're still, in their late 20s and 30s, very, very involved in their video games. The fact that you were able to give that up and walk away from it really shows me that you were truly on a new path, and there was the
Yeah,
time.
I definitely I didn't just turn a new page. I opened a whole new book and chapter in my life during that time. I did come back around to playing video games again, and now I'm still an avid gamer, and
Uh-huh.
I support video games. I think they're fantastic. Um, but yeah, during that time, I needed to completely redo who I was at the time.
Well, uh, I think it's an important field for you to be in also because of the amazing artistry that you do. I think you could find yourself a place in some of those gaming apps, creating
Yeah,
creatures.
you
Uh,
know what's funny about that too is that now as an adult, looking back on gaming and how it's changed over the years, the decades, it's funny because I find myself differentiating between good gaming and bad gaming, kind of like nutritious food and fast food, right? Or candy. And so, for instance, a lot of the mobile gaming on iPads and iPhones and things like that, I find to be very much like candy that sure they're fun and if you just need a way to maybe just relax and take your mind off of the rest of your day, sure, then it can be fine for that. But you're never going to find a deeper meaning in those kind of games.
mhm.
And you can find lots of great deeper meanings and incredible stories and mythology and characters if you find the right other kinds of games. Um, but yeah, I could talk about
But
that for
but
quite a while, but I don't,
there's
we're
so
not
much.
here for video games, right?
Yes, no. So I'm going to go on to my next question, though I'm glad we spoke about this because we don't know what young people will listen to this show, so it'd be good for them.
Hmm.
Uh, I want to discuss mostly about your book, Mythic Color, but before we do that, I have to hit on the Rolling Thunder experience first, with
Hmm.
basically one question, and I'd like to share my little experience of having met your grandfather.
Yeah, sure.
So, first of all, I met your grandfather when I was 17 years old, so that's exactly 50 years ago. And I had a produce stand called Moby Fruit that I had started when I was that age. And I was a buyer in the produce markets. And it was up here in Northern California in an area where it was right down the road from where the Grateful Dead had their like ranch for people to come up and hang out called the Emerald Valley.
Mm.
And so those people that lived there, Nikki and I can't remember what his name is, Rock, Nikki and Rock Scully used to shop at my store. And so when Rolling Thunder was visiting with them, he brought them into the store. And I wasn't there that day, but my friend that was attending to the register, Debbie, was, and she asked him a question when they came for checkout. And it was about something about spirituality. And when he answered it, it just opened her up in such a way that she went home. She was a musician and she wrote the most beautiful song about your grandfather.
Mm.
I heard it was played before a concert where he was going to give a spiritual talk and then there was going to be a concert of some sort. And her
You
song,
think there's a way we can hear that song somewhere?
I was going to try to contact her. She lives in Chicago and see if she still had a copy of it. I have one album that she made, and I'm not sure if the Rolling Thunder is on it or not. And I just came across it. I couldn't get the answer before our show, but I'm going to look up for it to see if I can get it for you to get so you can hear it because it was a very beautiful, she played on piano and it was a
Mm.
very beautiful song and very beautiful words. And she was very moved by him. And so I ended up getting invited over for a little ceremony he was going to do in the Emerald Valley. And we met there. And I happened to be a very hot number in those days. And for some reason, all these particular spiritual leaders and types were always sexually attracted to me. And I
Mm.
was first passing judgment in those days that, oh, if you're a spiritual leader, you shouldn't be attracted to an 18-year-old, that you're supposed to be spiritual. But I came to learn that actually many of the men that I encountered that were doing teachings and spiritual things all seem to have this feeling of a sexual connection or desire. And
Mm.
that's when I realized that part of the power in all of that knowledge and information is also sexual energy and sexual power. And since I was a very sexual being, no wonder these men were attracted. So I don't pass any judgment on it anymore. But in the old days, I used to think that they were all dirty old men, you know?
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think a lot of that comes down to your sort of your personal myths about what you may believe on how the world is supposed to operate. But I can see some people, believing that those men were coming from a bad place. And I don't know, maybe they're right. And maybe some of them were, maybe all of them were. I don't know them, so I couldn't say.
I don't
But
think that. I don't think of it as a judgment. I just
yeah,
think that's how it was.
yeah,
But it's just sort of like, I feel very honored to be having this man I met 50 years ago's grandson on my podcast today. There's something about it that makes it feel like a small world, and the fact that I got to be in your book and write my story. So and I'm really not getting to know you until really today. So I just love how all these things bridge together. And I have to give a shout out to Stanley Krippner, who
yeah.
keeps recommending the most incredible guests on my show. And they all, when he sends them to me, I always find some kind of connection I've had with them in the past. So it
That's
feels
great. Yeah,
really
it
great.
is really fun. You had this interaction with Rolling Thunder so long ago, and now here I am, you know,
Yes.
down the line,
And doing some,
and you're in my book,
yes.
which I
And
have
that's,
right here.
yes, beautiful. The
For
voice of
anybody
Rolling
who's
Thunder.
interested, the voice of Rolling Thunder. Gail has some comments in here as well. I think you said page 275.
Yeah, 274 and 275.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that with the audience because I always like to, I got to always share one of my stories here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
It's
fascinating. I
just the
mean,
connection. And I also feel like, oh, someday I'll be long gone and maybe my children or grandchildren or somebody may end up watching some of these videos one day because they'll be there on YouTube forever, it seems like.
yeah, well, they might start their own
So,
podcast or
but
something.
they might
The VR podcast.
right, virtual. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about, first of all, some of our audience may not even actually know what is the definition of personal mythology.
So there's probably numerous ways to explain it. And it's actually been one of the difficulties is coming into this field that it's not a fully developed field. Um, but here, I'll go ahead and try and explain it first, and then we can sort of talk about the rest of what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Uh, Personal mythology, I see as a lifestyle, but you could also refer to it as a method that emphasizes looking into your life stories and the meanings behind those. Because what happens is that um, you will have a life experience, a story will happen in your life, and then you will tell yourself a story about that experience of what occurred. But even though three people could have the same experience, they can walk away with three different stories, right? That's where the personal mythology stuff comes into play, is that one person might walk away with a new fear, a personal myth regarding fear of the situation. Somebody else walks away with a new rule about life, or a piece of wisdom or belief. Um, all these different categories of personal myths, basically. And personal mythology allows you to go back in time, take a look at those things, and start digging around and seeing if the story that you created at that time, is it still serving you well? And what else can you discover about it? And would you maybe like to change your story at this point, or your perspective of it, so that you can free yourself in life? You can become a bit more empowered. You can let go of things in the past that are holding you back.
And so it's a way of really, it's almost like looking at, say, astrology or other things that are dictating things about yourself, but in this, you're choosing what are the things, like whether it's a specific color or story or how that story affected your beliefs. So it's how stories have
Yeah.
affected your belief system.
Yeah. Yeah. And aside from stories that happen in our lives, we also tend to build these stories around like archetypes, for instance, like a color. So the color green.
My favorite color you picked.
Yeah, that's your favorite color, right?
Yeah, I live on Green Valley Road specifically. When I drove by and I was a teenager, I said, I have to live on that road one day because of the color is so important to me. And now
And
I've lived
that's
here 45 years on Green Valley Road.
that's a great example because your desire to live on, on that particular road is obviously driven by a long line of personal myths throughout your life, stories that happened throughout your life that have influenced your feelings about the color green.
Mhm.
And so not only is there that very individual story timeline that affected your view of it, but then there's also the cultural aspect of, as a culture, what we tend to associate a color with. And so I'll be going out on a little bit of a limb here and taking a gamble by guessing some of your associations with green.
Mhm.
But a lot of the time when people associate with green, they tend to lean more towards an ecological sort of standpoint on life. There's a focus on nature and the earth and sort of the sacredness of life itself. There might be focus on healing um, and nurturing, making sure that people are sort of getting the nutrients they need in different respects.
You don't leave here without gaining weight when you come to my house.
See, yeah. So do you feel like those things apply to you as well?
Very accurate, because I grew up in New York City and I came out here to the Russian River and the Guerneville area and redwood trees for a
Hmm.
visit. And when I went back to New York, I said, I can't live here anymore. I have to be with nature. And I was 15 at the time. And I knew that, dressing up nicely and competing heavily in the New York City situations, the aggressiveness, all the fast pace was really not for me. When I came and sat by a creek and a tree, which I had never really done living in New York City, I found a sense of myself that I knew that I needed to be in nature. And where
Yeah.
I right now, I have 15 acres of apple trees and I grow lots of food and I like to feed people. So
Hmm.
it seems to go with what you're saying about green.
So you really tapped in to your personal mythology. You discovered it, even just by chance. It happens like that sometimes, where you wander into, mythologically, I would call that a realm. You
Mhm.
came into the realm of nature, uh, and realized, bam, that's what you needed to go for. And take a look at, you said you came from New York.
New York City.
Okay, so mythologically speaking, and specifically about colors, the way that I would categorize New York is sort of a black and red and maybe some purple. And I'll tell you why. So the red is because there's a whole lot of like drive and determination and taking action sort of thing going on, the rush and all that in the competition, like you said, in New York, right? The black is that there's a whole lot of professionalism, mastery, being, needing to be confident in your fields and appearing as a professional, and standing up as a what do you call it when somebody has stature, an authority figure in your field, those sort of things. And you'll notice, a lot of people don't necessarily know this if they haven't been to New York or whatever. But if you go to New York and you're, in part of the central areas, you see a lot of people walking around in black. There's a lot
Yes.
of wearing of black. And there's very powerful mythological reasons behind all that, which I basically just explained, with the color black. The purple, I would say, comes from, there's this other sort of um, other side, the underbelly or something of New York, where it's like grandeur and fantasy, and it's almost like they escape the harshness of the black and red by going into theater and the big productions behind all that kind of stuff, right? There's not a lot of room for, let's say, a green type personality in New York.
No, I never felt like I fit in there.
Yeah. I would say also a yellow type person may not have a great time there either. I mean, there's ways to carve out your place, but
Well, purple
it's
sounds
difficult.
like a right color when you're thinking of the culture there, the museums, the being exposed to, where can you go to a melting pot like that of so much, you can eat in restaurants from people that came from all those different countries around the world and have the
Hmm.
most incredible food that you could ever imagine, see the
Yeah.
most amazing art and sculptings and things in the museums that you're not going to find unless you're going into European museums. And
Hmm.
also that whole fast pace and energetic thing does create, amazing productions of people to do things in theater and music and, the most bling or whatever it is they do. And
I
purple
feel like it's their
seem like
escape.
that. Yes. And purple's like, whoa, that would seem that sort of thing. It makes a lot of sense. So
Purple loves refinement and culture.
mhm,
That grand lifestyle of like, oh, I've been to this many countries, I've seen all these museums, and it's very, very purple kind of state of mind.
yes. So now what tell us more about what the Mythos Color book is about. Is that for a person themselves to engage, or what's the involvement there?
So, the things that we just talked about regarding color and the mythological aspects of them, it's about that. And but you know what? Can I throw a couple images up on the screen and
Absolutely, that would be great.
let me share here.
And I was wondering, in the mythology, are you drawing on any mythological heroes or, people from the times of the Greek times, or is there things like that involved with the mythology?
Um, yes and no.
Mhm.
So in terms of like classic mythology, the way I usually relate it to personal mythology is that I say, in classic mythology, you have heroes and villains and um, treasures and battles. And also in personal mythology, you have heroes and villains and treasures and battles, right?
Right?
Because really, mythology, the classic mythology, is really just a mirror of our life. It's a metaphorical mirror of the human life, right? So when you're talking about the gods and these battles and how the hero goes through all these fantastical things, they're really just metaphorical parallels of the trials and tribulations that we go through in our own journey in life. So that's the connection there. And with personal mythology, it's basically the bridge that allows you to bring what seems like fantasy into your daily, very, very practical life and your daily decisions.
Very
So
interesting.
yeah.
Also, I see
So
that slide. Go ahead.
oh yeah, sorry. So here's some pages from Mythic Color that I'm working on right now. Here's the page for green. You've got the traits. These traits, uh, and I'll be noting this in the book, they're not going to be the same for everybody, obviously. And they can also differ a great deal depending on what part of the world you're in.
Mhm.
So, you know, unfortunately, I can't cover everything in the world regarding how everybody sees a particular color or anything, but I can give a general idea, and my focus right now is mostly in the US. So it's a fairly US based book, and in the future, I think I'll be doing a book that is more of a worldwide focus.
And are you responsible for the drawings that are behind the text in this?
Yes and no. So the images that you see here, for the most part, are actually artificial intelligence generated imagery. And so like the background and the green orb and that sort of thing. But you know, I've been a graphic designer for like 20 years, and the amount of work I've put into every one of these pages is just dozens and dozens of hours. So when you see, for instance, the Rococo carved frame that goes around the orb, you know, those are elements that I've brought in from elsewhere. The glassy sphere itself, I constructed, and then I put the imagery behind the glass, you know. But all the lighting on the glass is something I've done. The background image, I've altered the lighting a great deal. I've gone through and
Well,
edited all sorts of little things.
it's made it look three-dimensional, like it's a round sphere on that. It doesn't look
Yeah,
flat the way that you did that.
right. And I added that three dimensionality to it. Yeah. And then of course you've got all the text
Mhm.
and the blocks that are housing the text and things like that. Those are all things that I do in Photoshop and I bring into my book.
And so how many colors do you have in the book that you cover?
So I'm going to be covering maybe somewhere between like 15 and 20 colors. What I have right here is, I just call them like the basic 8 or the core 8. And so that runs you through the primary, the secondary, and then black and white. I'll try and pause on each one of these so that you could take them in a little bit.
Yeah. These also remind me of like tarot cards or something like that.
That is part of the feel that I wanted for it. You know, with tarot, you have that concept that the images that you're looking at have a great deal of meaning behind them.
Mhm.
And that's definitely something that I've wanted to convey here.
They're beautiful. For the audience who doesn't have YouTube and they're listening, I would say jump to a YouTube at someone's house and check out these amazing images. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, and also if anybody follows me on social media, I post about these all the time. I'm always posting and asking questions of my audience of what sort of imagery that they like, and uh, what they don't like, and just trying to
Can
get
you
feedback, you know.
can you tell them the link, even though we'll have everything in our description for the people who are just listening or not necessarily looking at description? Could you tell them where they should click on to find this?
Yeah, so you can find me on mostly on Facebook and Instagram. And honestly, if you go anywhere onto any of those platforms and you search for Sidian or Sidian Jones, you'll find me because nobody else has that name. But for instance, on Facebook, it's facebook.com/ Sidian M.S. Jones. And that's MS as in Morningstar.
And that's Sidian, capital
Correct.
M period, capital S period, Jones.
Yes, although you can't put the periods in the web address because it,
Just MS.
yeah,
Great.
yes, Sidian M.S. Jones.
Well, I took a photo of the green so that I could look at it again after we finish our podcast, because I found it very interesting that
Yeah, I
that
can send these
particular
all to you.
color really said what happened in my life at that time.
Mm. Oh, and also my website is mymythos.org. So that's MYMYTHOS.org. And you can subscribe to my newsletter there. I'm not doing anything with the newsletter just yet, but I will. And so you can
Okay.
get free posters and stuff of all this imagery. Now, Gail, you said that green is really speaking to you on this page.
Yes.
How so?
Well, because so many of these things were the things that I experience in my youth and changing from, leaving from New York and coming to this, and everything was driven by the fact that I wanted to be in nature and not in a big city. And I never knew that about myself. So
Mm.
it wasn't until I was sitting there in those colors surrounded by green. And I always had, I had green curtains. My house was full of green objects, green chairs.
In the
So
middle of New
sometimes,
York, right?
yeah.
Did you have a lot of plants then too?
Yes, and where I live, I have so many things growing here. And I don't have what I call a green thumb, but other people think everything here looks really lush and amazing, but I don't really know that much about gardening. I just kind of throw myself into it. And I've just learned over the years because it was nothing I knew about.
Hmm.
And um, and it's a wonderful experience when you plant a fruit tree and you're still living there to be able to eat the fruit off the trees that you plant.
That
It,
is really cool.
yeah, it's very cool. And I
Or
recently,
having children and grandchildren who can partake of that.
well, I set up something that my nieces know that they love their Auntie Gail. So no matter what crazy thing she asks for, they will do it for Auntie Gail. So
Hmm.
even though they're all, except for two, the rest are in the East Coast, all 9 children that my nieces had together, I have the placenta of every single one buried here with a tree. And
Oh, wow.
so when I just did
They're
one
very
2 weeks
nutritious, I
ago,
understand.
yes, well, that's why I think it feeds the tree. So when they came, they keep them in the freezer. So, or I keep them here in the freezer. So my niece just brought her little daughter, Hannah, who had not had her tree planted yet because of COVID, and she's 3.5. So they were able to fly from Massachusetts 2 weeks ago, and we
Mm.
planted a beautiful plum tree. And I explained to them, and each child, it's so interesting to see how each child reacts to the
Mm.
ceremony of the planting of the placenta. And
Yeah,
there is fruit coming off of the trees. We have amazing persimmons coming from one. We have plums from another, peaches. So the kids get to come and see their name at the base of the tree and know that they're picking the fruit that's their tree.
that's
And
really neat. I often refer to ritual as mythology in motion, and
mhm.
that ritual that you're describing is really interesting. Did you come up with that yourself, or
Yeah, I made it up because I did it with my
that's
son,
great?
and I couldn't do it with my daughter because I didn't have that idea back then 45 years ago, but I did it for my son. And then my youngest daughter, my husband wouldn't let me plant the placenta because he kept saying that we might need it for future science to grow a finger or something.
What?
So for 14 years, it was sitting in my freezer until one of his dear friends, who's an incredible doctor, said, David, that is not the correct temperature to store a placenta. It's no good anymore for that. You're not going to.
Maybe with future science advances, who knows?
Maybe. So we plant that. So then he gave permission for us to use it. And we did a ceremony planting my daughter's tree, which is pomegranates. And they
Mm.
came out beautifully. And then my niece's son, Ben, we planted his pomegranates. So we did them 2 pomegranates, which are all producing. And it doesn't matter whether the placenta is a fresh one or a 14-year-old one, it still gets
Yeah,
planted.
it's such a cool ritual. You just I see the mythology behind it, the meanings there of birth and moving on through the generations of nurturing it through the tree and it providing. Really
And not
neat.
only that, but I remember when I was shown, I think it was my son's placenta, I can't remember, but it looked just like a tree in the placenta itself, the way the veins and all the things came out. It looked like
Yeah.
a tree of life. And I think
Hmm.
that's somehow where I picked up this crazy idea that I was going to plant trees with placentas in them.
Yeah, well, it's like you're participating in this apparently fractal universe that we have going on. And it's like you're taking an active role in that fractalness of feeding the tree like veins and such to to the tree, which has its own vein structure going on, and it's
It
neat.
was- And I'm just grateful that all my nieces, even though they thought it was a little crazy, they were all happy to do it. And now when they see the fruit and the kids are 8 years old and 13 years old, and they come and they take it off the tree, it's a very happy occasion.
I must say, of all the placenta rituals I've heard, I like that one the best.
I have to say, so do I. I'm not where I hear they capsulate it now. They do all kinds of
Yeah,
things, and yeah.
yeah, and I understand, the potential nutritional benefits and stuff like that, but I don't know, that part for me, it's like it's not enough to convince me to go along with that particular thing. But your ritual, I would definitely partake in that.
So, well, hopefully some people who've heard the show may start trying to do this now. You never know. And it
Yeah.
used to be you had to ask for your placenta and it was like an ordeal.
Hmm.
Now they have little special plastic Tupperware things ready for it because so many people have asked
Oh.
to take their placentas home. So
Oh, they probably just did they
again,
have a little Chinese to-go box for him?
yes.
With a fortune cookie.
Great, great. All right, so we just sent it on. So let's go back to our our impact of one's identities, beliefs, and values in this.
Maybe I should I'm still screen sharing. Should I hop
Okay.
off of that?
Unless there was another part of the book you wanted to show beside the color. Do you want to show any other color pages?
Well, I cycled through them. We could talk briefly about just the sections that are on the page.
Okay.
I won't spend too long on it, but you've got the traits here, which I explained, like they won't apply to everybody. They're just more of a general idea cloud of things. You've got about this archetype. So I just talk briefly about how culture tends to see this color and using the power of green. This part, I I wouldn't treat it necessarily very seriously. I mean, all of this is just a guide. It's just rules of thumb, right?
Mhm.
But these are just brief, basic ideas of how might you incorporate this color in your life. So, for instance, helping someone heal physically or emotionally, or taking care of plants, eating vegetables, growing your own food, um, cleaning up, garbage around the world and in nature, things like that. And then on the other page, I've got if the color green is part of your personal mythology, you may, and I make sure to use these qualifying words like you may, because this isn't again, it's not a rule book, right? These are just some basic ideas of what you might believe, what you might fear, what kind of strengths and weaknesses you might have if the color green is a big part of your personal mythos.
Yes, I think this is why I see them like cards.
Yeah, I want people to, this is a guide, but I want people to ultimately use it as a jumping, a jump start to
Mhm.
using their own imagination of what it really means to them.
Very nice. Okay. And this is forthcoming. So do you expect this to be out in 2023?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Hopefully in the next 3 months, somewhere around there.
So let me hit you up with another question here
Should I
about,
switch back to our cameras?
okay.
Or
I
I
know I'm
was just
looking at
asking,
your
or do you want to
images,
talk?
unless you have another image to put up. I love the images. I
Oh,
wanted
I've
to,
got all sorts of fun images.
oh, so let's put up another image. They're so beautiful.
Okay, I'll
So
just toss one up. Here's a AI generated Alan Watts that I used to make a sort of another kind of tarot card of like the guide or mentor. I really like that one.
that's beautiful.
Here's
So
a cover for the book.
very nice. Those look like crystals going across.
Yeah, The idea was actually my wife Tasha came up with the idea of these color bars, and what she got it from was stained glass windows.
Ah,
Turned out great. I love that.
um, it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful cover. So, can you talk about the process of discovering and exploring personal mythology through various methods?
Yeah. So it's a big topic because there's so many ways to approach it. I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that there's any one way to go about it. And if you look at some of the first material we have on it, which is Stanley Krippner's book called Personal Mythology, um, he does outline, he outlines a five-step process. Um, and I couldn't I couldn't from memory tell you the exact process, but it's easy to look up, and people should get the book.
Hmm.
Um, but that is one method, and then within the same book, he lists many rituals, perhaps dozens of rituals, um, that help you find your personal myths about things, especially like familial myths, about your parents and siblings and things like that. His methods are very tactile and using sort of your body and mind in conjunction. For instance, you might stand up and you think about your father standing behind you, and then you take a step backwards into your father's body, and now you are imagining things as your father and looking at yourself as your father and things like this, right? So it's a very ritualistic, tactile approach. And then you have methods that I use. I'd say some are more analytical in that they run you through mental exercises, and some are just sort of a series of very specific questions to lead you down a certain line of thought that will bring you to stories of your past.
So this is like a combination of psychology with you looking at the stories that where you created, say that your myth is all fathers are supposed to be breadwinners. Would that be sort of like what you mean in your mind, where you think to yourself, oh, that's my image, every father or man is supposed to do this? Is that what you
Absolutely, yeah, that would be a great example of a personal myth. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and just for anybody who doesn't know, a personal myth, it doesn't mean that it's not true. In fact, I tend to say that personal myths do not operate in the space of true and false. They operate in the space of true for you.
Mm-hmm.
They're outside the realm of true and false. They don't work like that, because anything that somebody deems, any personal myth that somebody has is automatically true. It doesn't matter whether you can scientifically disprove the logic of it or anything like that. If they believe it, that's the truth that they are operating from. And so if you want to be able to relate to that person, empathize with that person, um, persuade that person, anything that has to do with a relationship with somebody else, you have to understand the personal myths that they're coming from, because those are the much deeper aspects of the personality that you don't get from the surface. You don't get necessarily from just talking to them day to day and stuff like that. It takes a really deep conversation to get down to those real personal myths. People don't normally pipe up and tell you, uh, I believe all fathers should be breadwinners, right? That's not a normal conversation, at least these days. So it takes a special circumstance, or something like Stanley's book, or my book and other projects to facilitate that sort of thing.
I'm thinking about, I'm just asking, is this like a myth type of thing? Where I look at the different, like there's something that happens in generations where it's untold, but we sort of accept certain ways in relationship. because it seems like that's how that generation affects it. So like in my say my aunt's generations, the women never went to work and they always took care of the husband, the house, and the family. So now in my generation, the next one, we did that, but there was a bit of a change in there. So where maybe the woman does get a job now, and the woman and the husband and wife both work. So like a
Mm,
whole nother thing was changed in that myth of how a family is supposed to be.
right.
And now I look at the new generation or the millennials, or so maybe that's 2 generations after me or something. And there I'm seeing the husbands are, I mean, when my nieces come with their husbands, they're the most amazing men that do all these things that we just assumed they don't do this. And they never did diaper changing, and they never did, it was my job. I'm just saying. And then I watch my nieces and they're going on vacation and the husband's watching the children and taking
Mm.
incredible care of them. I mean, they're doing fantastic jobs. So I'm just thinking, is that part of those kind of same things of myths where they go generationally like this, where certain things are just kind of accepted? Oh, this is the way the family nucleus is, or everybody was into, like, I don't think marriage is so important anymore in the thing like it was a few generations ago, where you were told, oh, you're supposed to be married and you're supposed to raise children. I came from an unconventional family, so we had a whole different things around those things. And that was much different than how everybody else was living in relationships. But it was,
Yeah, and you do see that where you definitely have these realms of mythos where you've got the individual personal mythology, you've got the familial mythology, and where you hand down those personal myths through your family. And then all of that is, of course, in tug of war with the societal mythology, right? Um, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It sometimes a family, their personal myths, due to the fact that they use a lot of ritual and other means of preserving their personal myths, sometimes a familial culture like that will survive a societal push,
mhm.
right? And you see that a lot with like religion, for instance. It becomes very taboo to go against the familial myth. And in this example, I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. To me, it's really neither. It really just depends on what is it that you want to achieve in your life, both as a family and an individual. But just as an example of surviving persistent familial myths, religion is a very good example of that.
So now I know you have a new screen here on how personal mythology works. Can you
Yeah,
talk about this screen here? Very beautiful images.
sure. This version, I updated it just yesterday, and I'm still working on it. Are you able to see my cursor as I move it
Yes,
around here? Okay.
absolutely.
So the curse, power, and treasure part, those are brand new. I'm still working on incorporating that. That's why they don't look as nice as the rest. But uh, this is my attempt to try to make as simple as possible the most core concept of personal mythology, which is, how do you get a personal myth? Like, what is it, and how does it affect you, right?
Mhm.
So from top to bottom, you've got just like I said before, mythological stories have heroes, villains, battles, and treasures. So does your life story. Look how 3 people can have the same experience but walk away with 3 different stories. So you've got you experience something is the first thing that happens. For instance, a dog bites you. Number 2, you tell yourself a story about the experience. I was just playing with a stray dog and it attacked me. Um, that story might be different for somebody else. They're going to say to themselves, well, I shouldn't have been playing with the stray dog. I knew it was dangerous and it attacked me, and that was my karma or something, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then 3, depending on the story that you told yourself, your beliefs change because of that, and you develop new personal myths. So moving down, You see these bubbles here, like, oh, I went to the beach, a friend lied to me, I heard a new song. And then the experience that we're dealing with is, at the moment, is a dog bit me. It goes down, we process it by telling a story, and it becomes one of numerous different personal myths. So the options I have here are: animals are unpredictable and scary, so you walk away with a fear, which, mythologically speaking, a fear is a curse,
Mhm.
right? That's how that would be depicted in a mythological story. Um, the second one here is: the dog was in control because it intimidated me. Threats control people. Um, so that's power. Under gaining a piece of knowledge or wisdom or what have you that tells you how to change or manipulate the world around you, the people around you, that sort of thing, is a form of power. And that can be used for good or bad. So you can develop a hero or a villain out of this idea that threats control people. If you walk away with that understanding, you might go seeking out people who use threats to control others and admonish them. You might attack them for doing that, right? You might defend the people being threatened. Or, depending on what else has happened to you, you might use that power for your own benefits.
Like you turn into a security guard or an officer to uh, 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 be able to legally control people.
Right. And we know that among the police force, there's a very high percentage of domestic violence in those
Mm.
households.
Oh,
So absolutely, that idea of power and that threats control people plays
mhm.
very well into the kind of mythology you see behind that group of people. And then the
Power.
third one is: abused animals react with abuse. I want to help animals.
Mm.
And I listed that as a treasure here. You can give these whatever label you want, as long as you're looking at it in terms of how would that be told in a mythological story. Then that shows you how the parallel happens between life and fantasy, basically, the relationship.
It's like a healing, sort of like healing, because instead of being afraid of the animal, you want to help the animal.
Mm-hmm. Oops. That's, sorry. There we
That's
go.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this shows you, just like you're saying, that you get to choose your path, right? And you could really encompass more of a healing path, or something destructive, or something constrictive, like a fear. And if you use personal mythology methods, like the ones that Stanley and I teach, that it allows you to go back, or even in the present moment, take a look at what is happening around you, whatever experience you're having, and decide in the moment. Even though you'll have a knee-jerk emotional reaction, you can stop and go, wait a minute, what is the path that I would most like to walk down regarding this? And to be able to stop and be conscientious and say, what kind of belief do I want to walk away with here? What story, what mythological epic story am I writing as the author of my life in this moment?
So would I be correct in saying then that if a person was to purchase and read this book, they could go through it and work on some of their own mythology and work on either changing some of the things they'd like to change by
Yeah,
understanding
absolutely.
by understanding through this what they already have set up? Because I'm sure that a lot of these things, some people don't even realize that they're doing some of the things because it's from so way in their whole lifetime.
Yeah, and my intent with this particular book is that I'm calling this page that we're looking at right now, I'm calling one of the core pages. And the
Mhm.
idea of the core pages is that I'm probably going to put them in almost all of my books, because they give you the basics of what is it that's happening to you on a mythological level so that you can understand what's going on there. And then I'll talk about it in a few pages. And in the color book, I'll go over the color pages like you saw. And then there's going to be other pages that go into more example and depth of things like, for instance, when you and I talked about New York and what does it
Mhm.
mean to live in New York and the kind of color culture and mythology that surrounds that whole atmosphere, and being able to use that idea to look at the environment that you've got yourself in right now as a reader of the book, to look around at your realm, so to speak, and ask yourself, like, what is the mythology and the meanings and the story that I've got around me right now, um, and how can I better acclimate to it? How might
Mhm.
I change it for the better? Or do I need a whole rewrite of my situation? Maybe I need to be somewhere else.
Very interesting. Is there another page you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there's a few fun things to look at. I really like this one. Uh, this I didn't mean for people to try and read the small text on it. I just put it there because, well, I thought it looked cool, basically. But I got feedback from people, and they're like, it's really hard for me to read that because it's so, you know, slanted and whatever. But you can try to read that if you want.
Oh,
It's
I
not
see, I
necessary.
see, okay, I see, I see.
Yeah. The idea of this image was just that I wanted to show people um, that it's sort of a gamified look, actually, at your personal mythology. And the idea is that I'm going to show you through my books how you can acquire each of these aspects of your own personality, your mythology, so that we're going to find your animal and your element and your color and your realm and your role and many other things. These are just a few of the ideas. Throughout my series of books, I'll be covering each of these aspects, and it's going to be so fun. It's going to be so full of the most colorful, awesome imagery. I have so much fun putting these together.
They're very beautiful. So this is in the book about colors, right? Discover and create your world. This is,
This particular image, not exactly. I
oh,
might
okay.
have something more like this.
Mhm.
Um, I'm working on exactly how I'm going to put that image in there, but the basic idea, the format, yes, this will be in there in some way. Originally, I had been designing these interactive documents, which actually you can find on Etsy. If you look up My Mythos on Etsy, there's an interactive version of this, which you can fill out yourself.
Yeah.
And so for the animal portion, you can click on it. You can put your own image of whatever animal you want there and color and all that stuff. And it's a lot of fun, but and they're very cheap. They're only like $5 each to get these documents, and they come with lots of other pages and questions. But I kind of found that I'm not so sure that people want to do the interactive documents, and so I've switched over to just writing the books.
Mhm. Right, then, and this be available on Amazon, and will
The
this
book
be,
will, yeah.
yes, okay.
Mhm.
So people can look for it in the future, but if they go to your site, they'll be able to see updates when this will be coming out.
Yeah, and they can participate in the feedback on what sort of things they'd like to see more or less of.
Mhm.
There's a great image of Joseph Campbell,
Wow.
basically one of the founders of this whole personal mythology thing. I don't think that he ever necessarily was specifically, I don't remember him specifically talking about personal mythology per se,
Mhm.
but he very much described what it is and how it affects our lives. And you can listen to just countless hours of his lectures and videos online. I would really encourage people to check out his stuff.
This is having you on as a guest is really the first time that I'm being exposed to the whole mythology idea. That's why I don't
Mm.
know that much about it. And I'm hoping that our listeners who don't know anything about this also will now have something else to check out, because it's very interesting and something completely different, and you're making it very current.
Yeah, actually, so that was my goal. You know, I met Stanley Krippner, who I think I mentioned is, you know, big in the realm of personal mythology. He wrote the book on it. But when I met him, when I was like, I don't know, 20 or something like this, uh, he introduced me to personal mythology, and it changed my life. And I realized that that could very well be the thing that, remember I talked about, I wanted to change the world when I turned 18, right? I realized that his material in personal mythology, that maybe I could make something that is a current version of all that, and I could update it with all the fun graphics and a little bit different approach, my own approach on things. And that's been my goal, is just my version, bringing it to, I don't know, more mainstream audience, I guess.
And I think probably a lot of the young people would be attracted to this also. I don't
I'm
think,
hoping so.
yes, I think the images alone would attract them. And
That's what I've been thinking too.
oh, I guess we're on the right track.
Yes. That's the idea.
So we're coming up to our hour now, and I was
Sure.
wondering what else you would like to share. There's no, time restraint, but um, that's a beautiful image. The
Isn't that
personal
fun?
mythology. Yes. So how about, do you want to share a little bit about the toolbox, and then we'll, unless there's anything else that you'd like to share?
Sure. I mostly brought this up because the image is just so fun to look at.
Yeah.
This is another AI generated image, and uh, and then I did a bunch of post production work on it in Photoshop. But the idea of this page is, this is just the introduction page to what I call the Personal Mythologist Toolbox. This one won't probably be in the color book. It's going to be in another book I'm working on.
Mhm.
Uh, and basically, it's just going to outline a whole bunch of the most effective ways that I have seen to work with personal mythology in yourself and in other people.
And can you highlight those waves, or is that too much to go into?
I mean, I could talk about a few of those methods, sure.
Okay.
So for instance, one of them would be uh, leaning into somebody's metaphor. So for instance, let's say you have a young boy and he's got some big anger issues, and you talk to him about it, and you ask him, you just, when you're doing this sort of thing, you want to remain very neutral, not having too much opinion about things. So what you'd want to do is ask him, okay, so when you're angry, like, what exactly are you thinking about, and how are you feeling during those times? And often what you'll come up with, what you'll hear from people, is they'll make a metaphor.
Mhm.
And the reason they do that is because most of our mind, most of what we know and feel and believe is in our subconscious, right? So, for instance, um, you don't go around thinking that you believe in either fate or free will. We all have our ideas about fate and free will, but you don't keep that on your mind constantly.
Mhm.
And yet, think about, oh, okay, so what is the relationship between the belief in fate and free will and the chance that you're going to buckle your seatbelt or not? And I'll tell you that what it is that if you're somebody who buckles your seatbelt, then you must believe, in some respect, deep down within yourself, that you have an impact on your fate. You have some free will. Therefore, if you take the action to buckle your seatbelt, you might prevent an injury, right? But if you don't believe that, if you believe that it's all fated and that it doesn't matter necessarily what you do, you're just there for the ride, then you may not buckle your seatbelt. simply based on that very, very deep personal mythology belief about how the world works, right?
Mm.
So anyway, back to the boy. Um, let's say he comes up with a metaphor. He says, when I'm angry, um, it's like I'm on fire. And then you ask him, well, okay, so what do you do with that fire? And then he says, well, it just makes me feel crazy and like I'm throwing fireballs everywhere. Um, and a kid might very well use this kind of idea because there's a lot of video games these days, and fireballs are a classic video game element, right?
Mhm.
And now he's embedded that in his personal mythology as an idea of uh, his experience with anger. So follow him into his metaphor. Okay, so you throw fireballs around. What happens because of those fireballs? Oh, well, um, I get in trouble. Okay, and do you think do you think that people get hurt from fireballs? And I had this experience with a young man talking to him about this sort of thing. And he said that he didn't think so, that it's just his anger. And so it just means that he's angry and he gets in trouble and it doesn't really impact other people. And I said, well, what do fireballs hurt people? And he said, well, yeah. And so I said, when you're throwing fireballs, do you think maybe there's a chance that that could hurt somebody? He said, yeah. So I said, do you think sometimes maybe those fireballs that you're throwing, you think that might have hurt somebody before? And he got really sad.
Um,
And that really spoke deeply to him, right? Because the same way that art speaks to us in powerful ways is because it is speaking to our subconscious, where the most powerful beliefs and emotions about our life and everything that we believe about it and ourselves reside. So if you speak to somebody's personal mythology and their metaphors and such, you're speaking the language of their subconscious, which is incredibly important if you really want to get through to somebody.
Very, very well
So,
said.
so that's the sort of thing that I would include in the mythologist toolbox. There's that and like a dozen other methods that
Mhm.
I've come up with.
Well, uh, if there's any other thing you'd like to share, this is the time to say your anything you want to, any message you want to tell our listeners.
A message. Well, I'm probably not prepared for a message.
Okay.
Well, okay, I'll say this.
Okay.
I would just say to take a good look at things from a I would say put on your mythologist lenses, is what I tell people. Look at the meanings behind things, no matter like literally everything. What is sitting on your desk right now? What kind of objects you have there? Look at the meaning behind them and the meanings of the traits that you call yourself. For instance, are you a serious person, a funny person, a weird person, etc. Uh, and the archetypes you associate with. So, like, would you consider yourself a fire element, water element, electricity, earth, that sort of thing? All of those meanings and stuff have these big mythological uh, reasonings behind them that are deep in your subconscious. And people like Stanley Krippner and Joseph Campbell and such will help you to walk through those and discover them and work with them. And it's a life-changing thing to do. And I like to tell people it's the funnest way to do self-improvement.
Great, great note. And I want to thank you for being here today. But before we sign off, I wanted to read a little poem that I read about on your site. And I thought it just really touched me. And you said it was the most favorite poem of yours that you had read by an elementary school. I don't know if it was a young boy or a young girl.
It was so there's a website called Reddit, and somebody posted this poem. They said that they found it crumpled up next to an elementary school, and on the piece of paper it says it was written by Noah, and I think that he was 9 years old. I think it says on there when he wrote this.
It's it's a sweet and simple thing, and I just wanted to share it with everyone and to think of
Yeah,
it
please do.
being nine, what a soul. The world is a place made of land and water, and even though it makes sense in pictures, I do not understand it.
That's right.
That's just so lovely.
It's
So,
it's such wisdom.
yes, wisdom. So here we are navigating through all of this, and wherever Noah is, thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. And his little piece of paper did not get for naught. It's been found, and now it's been said in many places, including your site, and now here. And it's often children, what do they say? The things that come out of the mouths of children is usually pure truth and wisdom because they're such beautiful little souls.
Yeah, a lot of wisdom to
So
be
I
had
want to
there.
thank everyone. Yes, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for being Rolling Thunder's grandson. And I'm sure he must be wherever he is in the cosmos, thrilled with the work that you're doing. And I want to thank Stanley Krippner for introducing me to such wonderful people. And remember, subscribe, like, share, comment. Check out Sidian Jones's work, his books, his artistry. We love having you here today, and we look forward to more interviews in the future. And I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. It was a pleasure having you here today.
Likewise, Gail. It's been a lot of fun.
And remember, audience, listeners, whoever's out there, share your stories because stories can heal. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.